F1 has Lewis Hamilton. NASCAR has Richard Petty. And when it comes to the world of offshore powerboat racing, there's one name that stands above all others when people talk about the greatest of all time. That name is Steve Curtis, a British phenomenon who graced the podium 70 times and clinched 8 world championships. The youngest world champion the sport has ever crowned at 21. He should have retired a decade ago. Instead, last November, at 61, he won every single race at the World Championships. His name is far from being forgotten. His impact on the sport is evident, his legacy exceptional. This is the story of a man who redefined offshore racing. 8 World Championships in Union Internationale Motonautique Class 1, which is the top tier of offshore powerboat racing. Formula 1, but wet, louder, and with considerably more chiropractic aftercare. He won the first one at 21 years old, which made him the youngest Class 1 world champion ever crowned, and the first from Britain to manage it. 4 decades later, that record has not been threatened, not approached, not even gently nudged.
Steve Curtis is a wild man.
Steve is literally the GOAT. He is the greatest of all time when it comes to catamarans.
Then there's the supporting cast of trophies: European Championships, Middle East Championships, 7 consecutive pole position World Championships. By one widely cited tally, he ran over 120 Class 1 races, took around 40 Grand Prix wins, close to 50 poles, and roughly 70 podiums. Some outlets credit him with 20+ world titles, once you count every category and series he's raced in, which tells you the man's resume has outgrown its own spreadsheet. He has a Seagrave trophy, he has an MBE, he has, at various points, held every title his sport offers at the same time. And none of that explains the interesting part, because the most decorated racer in offshore history spent his career in the seat most people watching don't even know exists. Steve Curtis was born in Wimbledon, London, in the summer that Ford launched the Mustang. His father was Clive Curtis, and if you know offshore racing history, that name does a lot of heavy lifting. Clive ran Cougar Marine, a British yard that did something the Americans hadn't managed. Cougar built the first catamaran to win an international offshore powerboat race and the first cat to take a Class 1 world title. In an era when offshore racing meant hammering a deep V monohull into a wall of water until your spine filed a complaint, Cougar was building boats that skimmed on a cushion of trapped air. Everybody else eventually copied it. So Steve grew up in a boatyard. Fiberglass dust, resin fumes, race weekends, the lot. Here's what most people miss though. He didn't want to race boats. He wanted to race motorcycles, and he was good at it, taking British schoolboy and junior motocross championships before he could legally drink in America. He left school at 17 and switched to the water only in his late teens, which turned out to matter enormously because motocross teaches you something no boat school can: how to read a landing before you're airborne. That instinct would go on to define an entire generation of racing. The mid-80s, Key West, Florida, the Offshore World Championships, at that point the loudest, richest, most gloriously unhinged event in motorsport. Curtis was in the cockpit of a Cougar hull running KS&W engines, alongside American racer A.J. Roberts. He was 21 years old, in a category stacked with wealthy owner-drivers old enough to be his father. Class 1 was, and remains, an eye-watering way to spend money. They won it. World champions understand what that meant. Class 1 boats are 2-man machines, and the 2 jobs are wildly different. One man steers, the other controls the power, the trim, and the attitude of a catamaran that spends a meaningful portion of each lap fully airborne. Get it wrong and the boat doesn't lose the race. It cartwheels.
We basically start off with an awful lot of horsepower.
Yeah.
We've got about 1,000 aside in here.
Yeah.
And then really to get going, we trim these down a little.
These move?
Yeah, these go up and down.
Yeah.
We trim those down a little, put our trim tabs down a little.
These things, so that's all adjustable.
That's all adjustable.
So if you push that down the front of the boat, the back comes up, the front goes down. Yeah.
And then you're up and on plane when you accelerate.
At 21, in a sport that eats rookies, he came home with the biggest trophy on offer. 2 years later, he did it again, taking a 2nd world title at Key West and becoming the first Briton to win the American Offshore World Championship. His partner for that 2nd title is where this story takes a hard left turn, because the man sharing that cockpit would later become one of the most notorious figures in American criminal history. His co-racer for that second championship was Willie Falcon. If that name rings a faint bell, it's because Falcon and his partner Sal Magluta were later identified as the operators of one of the largest cocaine trafficking organizations in South Florida history. Los Muchachos, billions of dollars, tens of tons of product moved from the Bahamas into Miami, frequently in the same class of fast boats they were racing on ESPN on the weekend. They weren't hiding. They raced under the team names Cougar and Seahawk. Magluta won 3 national APBA championships and sat on an APBA commission. Their engine shop, KS&W Offshore Engineering in St. Augustine, was regarded as state-of-the-art, and federal authorities later seized it in money laundering proceedings. Falcon was eventually convicted and deported. Now, an important word here. Curtis was a British kid in his early 20s, hired to go fast in a boat, and he was never implicated in any of it. But you cannot tell the story of 80s offshore racing without acknowledging what was funding a chunk of the grid. Don Aronow was murdered on Thunderboat Row in that same period. The sport was glamorous, televised, enormously fast, and standing on some deeply questionable foundations. Curtis was one of the few who came through it clean and kept winning long after the money went to prison. What he did next, though, is the decision that actually made him untouchable, and it involved giving up the steering wheel. Here's the thing nobody outside the sport understands. In offshore racing, the driver is not the star. The driver steers. That's it. The throttleman controls everything else, and everything else is where races are won and lost. He's working the throttles, the trim tabs, the drive angle, and the engine speed, dozens of adjustments a minute, reading the water 4 or 5 waves ahead and deciding how much power the boat gets at the precise moment it leaves the surface. Get greedy and the props over-rev in mid-air, the boat lands nose down and you stuff it. Get timid and you're a spectator. The throttleman decides whether the hull kisses the next wave or detonates against it. Curtis moved into that seat, and it's where he became something close to unbeatable. He threw in with Italian drivers Leonardo Poli and Lamberto Leoni through the 90s, an era when Class 1 boats ran screaming Lamborghini 512S, engines so exotic that Ayrton Senna reportedly tried one. Lamborghini Offshore Power collected a dozen world championship wins before the program wound down. But those years were lean for Curtis. 11 seasons passed between his second world title and his third. In a career this decorated, that's a long time in the wilderness. Everything changed when a Norwegian businessman with a serious competitive streak came looking for a throttleman. The partnership that followed rewrote the record books and turned a national flag into the most feared boat on the circuit. Bjorn Rune Gjelsten was a Norwegian entrepreneur who wanted to win Class 1, and he had the resources and the nerve to try properly. He and Curtis teamed up in the mid-90s in a boat called Spirit of Norway, and it became the most successful pairing the class has produced. Gjelsten steered, Curtis ran the power, and for the better part of a decade, everyone else raced for second. The third world title came in the late 90s. Then the machine started properly turning. World championships in 3 consecutive seasons a few years later, European titles, Middle East titles, and a grip on qualifying that the rest of the fleet gave up trying to break. Consider what that consistency means in this sport. A Class 1 boat is a 40-something foot carbon catamaran, north of 2,000 horsepower, running at 160 miles an hour over open sea in weather that would keep most of us at the dock. Boats break, boats flip, boats sink. Winning one championship is a matter of speed and luck in roughly equal measure. Winning them back to back means you're doing something nobody else has figured out. What Curtis had figured out was restraint. Competitors describe him the same way over and over. While rivals overdrove the conditions, blew up gearboxes and stuffed Ba'ao, Curtis brought the boat home, frequently first, almost always in one piece. Then, at the peak of it, his driver retired. Losing the man you've won everything with should end a dynasty. It gave him the best season of his life. Gjelsten stepped back from the cockpit in the middle of the 2000s, and another Norwegian, Bård Ecker, took over as owner and pilot of Spirit of Norway. New driver, same throttleman, same result, another world champion. Championship. Then Gjelston came back for one more run, and the pair did something almost nobody in the class has managed. They won the lot. The World Championship, the European Championship, the Middle East Championship, and the pole position World Championship in one season. Every trophy that existed in the same calendar year. That's the run that put him on the honours list. He'd already taken the Seagrave Trophy, Britain's award for outstanding skill and courage in transport, which sits on shelves belonging to Jackie Stewart, Nigel Mansell and Damon Hill. The clean sweep brought an MBE from the Queen in her 80th birthday honours. By that point, the argument was over. Not best British offshore racer, not best throttleman of his generation. His own competitors were calling him the finest to ever hold a set of throttles, which in motorsport is roughly the highest compliment available, since rivals are contractually obliged to think you got lucky. He was in his early 40s, holding every title in the sport at once, and there was one race run practically past his own front door that he had never won. It had beaten him twice, embarrassed him once, and his father had conquered it when he was a small boy. Cows to Torquay and back, 190 miles down the English south coast, and a race founded in the early 60s by newspaper baron and wartime fighter pilot Sir Max Aitken after he watched the Miami-Nassau race and decided Britain needed one. It is not a sprint, it's an endurance event in cold, grey, unreasonable water, and it does not care about your championship record. Curtis had entered 3 times across his career. Second place once, behind Italian legend Fabio Buzzi. 2 retirements. His father Clive had won the thing back at the end of the 60s, which is the sort of family footnote that ages like an unpaid bill. So, a decade ago, he went back. And he did it in an aluminum Cougar Use 1 46-footer that was roughly 30 years old, rebuilt with Mercury Racing 1350 engines and M8 drives in the worst seas anyone racing that day could remember. Force 7 westerly, boats retiring everywhere. Curtis throttled that old aluminum boat through it with driver Richard Carr and navigator Paul Sinclair, averaging 58 miles an hour on the outward leg, and crossed the line to a quayside that had waited a long time for it. 3 decades after his first world title, he had the one trophy his father had and he didn't. This is the part that gets skipped in the highlight reels. Curtis didn't only race for Cougar, he runs it. When his father's operation was absorbed into the Tollman Group in the late 70s, it moved into the old Fairy Marine premises at Hamble Point. Tollman later stopped trading, so Clive relocated the operation across the river and renamed it Cougar Powerboats. Steve took over on his father's retirement, sharing the management with longtime colleague Pete Currington, and the yard remains on the Hamble to this day. What comes out of it isn't what you'd expect. Yes, there are race boats, but Cougar hulls have been adapted into patrol craft and service boats for navies and coast guards around the world, which need the same combination the race program demands: speed, seakeeping, and a structure that doesn't fatigue itself to pieces after a season of abuse. One of which ran a single 200 horsepower Mercury Verado on a 6.5-meter owner's launch. And they've partnered with Griffon Hoverwork on a British fast monohull brand. Curtis has been open about why the racing matters commercially. When a Cougar survives the roughest conditions anyone can remember while the fleet around it sinks and retires, government procurement officers notice. You can't buy that kind of demonstration. You have to go out in a Force 7 and earn it. The next chapter didn't start with a trophy or an order book. It started with a call nobody wanted to make. The following summer, at the St. Clair River Classic in Michigan, 2 race boats collided. The Miss Geico and Cat Can Do teams were involved, and throttleman Keith Holmes was killed. Offshore racing has never pretended to be safe. Modern Class 1 boats carry reinforced canopied cockpits with onboard air supply for a reason, and that reason is that a catamaran losing grip at racing speed becomes an aircraft with no wings and no plan. Every racer knows someone. In the aftermath, Miss Geico's longtime cockpit crew stepped away. It was a painful decision and an understandable one. Crew Chief Gary Stray, who had known Curtis for decades and worked alongside him at Cougar in England, made the call. Curtis said yes. He was in his 50s by then, with 8 world titles behind him, nothing left to prove, and every reason to stay home. He climbed into the most famous raceboat in America instead, at the lowest moment in that team's history, and helped hold it together, which set up the most entertaining pairing of his entire career. His next driver had never raced a boat in anger, and had already broken most of the bones in his body. Travis Pastrana, motocross icon, rally champion, NASCAR guest star, professional maniac. Pastrana came into Class 1 with the Husky team, sharing the cockpit with Curtis in a 47-foot Victory catamaran. And the man alongside him was, remember, a former British motocross champion himself. 2 dirt bike kids, 30 years apart, in a 2,200 horsepower carbon catamaran. For the record, driver Britt Lilly took the wheel for part of that title campaign as well. Modern Class 1 is spec power now. Every boat runs twin 9-litre, twin turbocharged Mercury Racing 1100, competition 5.8S with tamper-proof electronics, so nobody buys a championship with an engine budget. Boats run 40 to 47 feet with a minimum weight around 11,500 pounds. It's a driver and throttleman formula by design, which is why what happened next was so telling. Curtis and the Husky crew took the Class 1 World Championship, giving him a 9th world title at 58 years old, in a sport where reaction time is the whole job. Then the sponsor walked away, the team folded after the following season, and the greatest throttleman alive found himself without a boat. Most people would call that a retirement. He treated it as an inconvenient gap in the calendar. Last summer, at the Lake of the Ozarks Shootout in Missouri, Curtis climbed into a 51-foot Mystic catamaran with owner Darrell Cuttle and ran 242 miles an hour on the 3/4-mile course. For context, over a decade earlier, he had run 244 miles an hour on the full-mile course with Qatar's Sheikh Hassan bin Jabor Al Thani, a number the sport assumed would never be approached again. He then approached it himself in his 60s on a shorter course. That run reunited an old friendship. Sheikh Hassan hadn't raced in 11 years. They talked, they found a boat, and last November, the pair turned up at the Key West World Championships in the Mercury-powered Spirit of Qatar 96 catamaran. They won the opening race by 2 minutes and 39 seconds, then the second race by nearly 3 minutes, then the finale by over 3 minutes, taking the Extreme Class World Championship with a perfect score. Full disclosure, because we don't do fairy tales here. Extreme was a 2-boat class that year. It was a clean sweep against one rival, not 14. But the man was 61, out of a raceboat for 2 seasons, and he didn't put a foot wrong across 3 races. 2 months later, he took a job that tells you where he thinks this whole sport is heading next. This past January, Curtis was named team principal of E1 Team Miami for the Electric Powerboat World Championship, a series whose team owners you read like an all-star roster. He'd already coached in that series and run its Brazilian team to a win in Lagos. The man who made his name on turbocharged V8S is now running batteries and hydrofoils, which is either a betrayal or a preview, depending on how loudly you like your weekends. But the legacy isn't the electric stuff, and it isn't the 8 titles either. It's that Steve Curtis proved the throttleman is the driver of an offshore boat in every way that counts. He turned the invisible seat into the famous one. He took rookies with no offshore experience whatsoever and made world champions of them. He kept a British boat-building family name relevant across 5 decades of an American-dominated sport. Others built faster boats. Curtis is the one who taught the rest of us how to actually use them. And the sport he has shaped looks nothing like the one he walked into as a teenager covered in resin dust. If you want more from this corner of the water, take a look at 15 most insane smuggling boats ever to outrun the law next. That's the story of the greatest offshore racer who's ever lived, and the strange truth that the best man in the boat was rarely the one holding the wheel. 9 championships, a youngest ever mark that 4 decades of challengers have left untouched, and a clean sweep at 61 for good measure. Same salt, same noise, different legend.